We're kicking off today with Monday Night Raw, as this week's show saw CM Punk cut his first promo since returning, and the gist of the promo is that after close to 10 years, Punk is finally home. Punk gave an update on AJ Lee and referenced Paul Heyman in his promo, but there are some who felt that this promo lacked the fire and substance that fans have come to expect of him. Instead, many felt it was a hollow corporate portrayal of Punk, which led to PG Punk trending on social media, a nickname given to Punk by MJF during their 2021 feud. Perhaps Punk would have had more fire to his promo given the originally allocated time, but because the Randy Orton vs. Dominik Mysterio match went long, Punk's promo was cut short. Even with this shorter time slot, Punk had plenty to say, and even had a nod to Bret Hart, who Punk considers one of the greatest of all time. Punk's opening line about how hell must have frozen over is the exact same line the Hitman had when he returned to WWE in 2010, over 12 years after the Montreal Screwjob in 1997. So what's next for Punk? Well, PW Insider has learned that Punk isn't planned for Friday's SmackDown, which will be in Brooklyn, and has not been assigned to any roster internally. Backstage reports indicate that CM Punk was very nice and humble throughout this week's Raw, which is seen as a promising sign, and matches Punk's promo in which he says he's changed. According to Wade Keller of PW Torch, Punk was in a good mood and made an effort to interact with everyone, with one wrestler acknowledging the importance of his humility. A wrestler said that Punk essentially had to be humble given that he's burned his bridges with AEW and has previously had a very contentious relationship with WWE. Punk's return to WWE is something fans thought they'd never see, but now he's back and ready to make some money, and if he can keep out of trouble, he'll do exactly that. While the crowd in Chicago were thrilled to see CM Punk return to WWE, Seth Rollins was far from thrilled, and in viral footage could be seen swearing and lunging for the straight-edge superstar. Rollins said on Raw that he wasn't going to waste his time on Punk, who he called a hypocrite, but it appears that the World Heavyweight Champion will be doing just that. Sports Illustrated has confirmed that Punk's first feud back in WWE will indeed be against Seth Rollins, and that there are also plans for Punk to work with Roman Reigns. The report states, "There are plans for Punk to feud with Roman Reigns. Sports Illustrated has learned, but it'll not be Punk against Reigns first, as that spot belongs to Rollins. A feud between Rollins and Punk is a massive positive for both men. Punk can still wrestle at a high level, but his work will only be enhanced in the ring with a world-class wrestler like Rollins. While it's not the current favorite, there is plenty of reason to believe Punk-Rollins could serve as the main event for the opening night of WrestleMania 40. For Rollins, that would simply not be the case without Punk. It'll be interesting to see how this turns out, as Reigns will not wrestle again this year, and his next match is expected to be at the Royal Rumble Premium Live event on January 27th. We'll have to see whether Punk steps up to the Tribal Chief in the next 2 months, but this would be some interesting storytelling, but only after he's finished with Seth Rollins. Are you excited for Roman Reigns versus CM Punk? And what role do you think Paul Heyman will have in this program? Share your thoughts in the comments. The wrestling world watched on during this week's Raw, eager to hear what Punk had to say, but one name who didn't tune in this past Monday night was Jon Moxley. During a recent interview with Liam Crowley, Moxley was grilled on Punk's "I'm Home" promo on Raw, and gave an interesting response, saying, "You don't want to know what I think. I didn't see it. You don't want to know what I think." Moxley was supposed to take a break after AEW All Out 2022, but following Punk's backstage fight, Moxley was brought back and made world champion, a sign that AEW feels that they can rely on him. While Moxley didn't get his much-deserved break, he feels that what happened following All Out proved that he can be counted on at a time when many top guys were getting suspended. He said, "I feel like I thrive in those situations. Scramble to the f***ing jets and get Moxley in the air. Oh, we don't have a main event. You've got to make people care about this and make a main event in a week. I just pull main events out of my ass in those situations. I feel more comfortable when I'm the guy with the ball in the fourth quarter. It's hard to not want to grab the ball and take the shot myself." For those keeping tabs, Punk had claimed that Moxley had refused to lose to him, while Moxley later said that the opposite was the case, and we'll likely never know what the real situation was. Whatever the situation may be, Punk and Moxley are no longer working together, and what do you think he meant by "you don't want to know what I think"? Let us know in the comments. CM Punk's Survivor Series return came 84 days after news broke of his termination from AEW, a decision that was made by Tony Khan after a week-long investigation. Tony Khan made it clear in his first speech after Punk's firing that the decision was ultimately his to make, but he wasn't the only person who looked into what happened. Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful reports that a 3-person committee, alongside an outside attorney, looked into what happened at All In and determined whether Punk should be fired. AEW's general counsel Chris Peck, who has assumed many of the responsibilities of Chief Legal Officer Mega Paresh, was on the committee, as was AEW star Bryan Danielson. One AEW source called Danielson an appropriate moral compass who exemplifies objectivity, and said that he was effectively the face of the Disciplinary Committee. Danielson spoke to the roster about the possibility of Punk being fired, and the source said that Danielson's decision was a particularly hard one, but one that had to be made. This represents an ongoing backstage responsibility for Danielson, who is tasked with administering fines when needed and has other backstage roles. Individuals who were interviewed mentioned that they believed CM Punk was already aware that Danielson was a part of the said committee, given that many of his friends were present in a meeting during which Danielson addressed them. Interestingly, this week, Danielson put out a tweet saying that the right thing is often the hardest to do, and it won't always be the most popular or make the most money, but is still the right thing. Was Danielson referring to CM Punk's firing in that tweet? We'll likely never know for sure, but the American Dragon felt he had no choice but to advise Tony Khan to fire Punk. And as for Khan, he stated that he can't legally talk about Punk, meaning the AEW president will simply have to watch on and see what WWE does with their latest massive signing. As we mentioned earlier, CM Punk made reference to his wife AJ Lee during his Raw promo, stating that the former Divas champion is doing fabulous and sends her regards. Lee's name was trending on Twitter shortly after Punk's Survivor Series return, as there's fans who want to see her back in the ring, but right now, there's no confirmed plans for this to happen. PW Insider states that there has been no discussions of her coming in and mentioned that she retired from action in 2015 due to health reasons and has gone on to have a successful writing career. The report added that a cameo appearance by AJ down the line wouldn't be out of the question, especially since there's plenty of talent who have praised her work as influencing their careers. It seemed impossible a few years ago that AJ would return, but Punk's comeback has proven to never say never in wrestling. And would you like to see her back? Let us know in the comments below. NXT news now, as in an Iron Survivor qualifier, Eddy Thorpe tried to fight through a rib injury, but he was ultimately overwhelmed by a confident Bron Breakker who got the win with a spear. Thorpe had bandaged ribs from last week's attack, and it made sense that Bron went after the ribs with every attack, setting up for the spear. This match went longer than it needed, but it told a clear story, and this match felt like two WWE superstars battling it out, as opposed to two developmental prospects competing. Breakker had to win to give the Iron Survivor Challenge a clear favorite, and while Thorpe is ready for more, he's not just quite put it all together yet. When his chance comes, he needs to bring the physicality shown in this match, but also raise the energy of his performance to be considered as more than he currently is in NXT. After weeks of intrigue, Andre Chase explained what the investigations into him have been about, and thankfully, WWE stopped short of fully recreating a Vince McMahon situation. Instead, the head of Chase U had revealed that the accusations of gambling and misuse of college funds are true, and that he is working on a way to get Chase University out of debt. The most hyped match going into this week's NXT surrounded Wes Lee, who was fighting for a chance to challenge NXT North American Champion Dominik Mysterio at NXT Deadline. Unfortunately for Lee, earning a title match would not come easy, as this week's show saw a fatal four-way with three other former title holders, Bronson Reed, Johnny Gargano, and Cameron Grimes. Once the bell rang, Reed flattened Lee before Gargano and Grimes teamed on the big man before being taken out, and it'd be the collective might of the three faces that would send Reed out of the ring. When Grimes was sent outside, Gargano and Lee shook hands before locking up, and there was an epic spot later in the match when Reed planted his three opponents with one Samoan drop. The faces again united to deliver a three-man powerbomb, and when Reed tried to hit the tsunami, fellow Raw superstar Ivar showed up and began brawling with his nemesis. This brawl spiraled backstage, and the finish saw Grimes hit Gargano with the cave-in before Lee nailed Grimes with the cardiac kick to win. Dominik Mysterio's plans to avoid a match with Lee have failed, and he'll now have to face Wes at Deadline, and a win over multiple main roster talents shows how much faith WWE has in Lee. NXT ended with a brawl in the parking lot, as officials couldn't break up Roxanne Perez and Kiana James, as the feud between these two is only expected to get uglier from here. More from Raw, and this week's show was probably one of the most anticipated Raws in years, with CM Punk and Randy Orton both confirmed, among other stars, but one name was notably absent backstage. PW Insider reports that Triple H was not at the show, and that Bruce Pritchard ran things backstage, and it was said that the game had been pulled away for other WWE business. Triple H's absence had been anticipated, but it's interesting that on a night that saw CM Punk's first Raw promo in close to a decade, WWE's head of creative was nowhere to be seen. Without Triple H around, this week's Raw saw some last-minute changes, though nothing as massive as what we'd seen in the past from Vince McMahon. Fightful Select reports that in the Tag Team Turmoil match, the original plan was for DIY to beat the Alpha Academy, then lose to the Creed brothers, who'd beat Indus Sher, Imperium, and the New Day. Instead, DIY defeated Alpha Academy and Indus Sher before losing to the Creeds, and the order would be changed, with the Creeds beating the New Day and then Imperium in the last match. No matter the change, the plan was for the Creed brothers to get the win, and they now have a date with the Judgment Day and the undisputed WWE Tag Team Championships. It was only recently that Drew McIntyre turned heel on WWE TV, at least according to some, but according to the Scottish Warrior, he's not a heel, but rather someone who tells the truth. In a video earlier this month, McIntyre questioned why he's seen as a heel, as he's simply reminding everyone of what Jey Uso did in the Bloodline and isn't ready to forgive Main Event Jey. It turns out that the fans agree with Drew, as in a poll asking whether McIntyre's anger as of late is justified, a whopping 74% sided with the former WWE champion. In a tweet, Drew said that 74% of fans are smarter than the boys in the back, and do you consider Drew McIntyre to be a heel, or are you on the side of the Scottish Warrior? It was at Survivor Series that Randy Orton made his return to WWE TV after a year and a half away, but fans won't have to wait nearly as long to next see the Legend Killer. After appearing on this week's Raw, Orton is being advertised for this Friday's SmackDown, and perhaps we'll see Orton put his plan to get revenge on the Bloodline in action on the show. More from CM Punk now, as on the collision after Punk was fired, Matt Jackson was spotted doing a victory lap, with many seeing it as a shot at Punk. Now Punk is back in the biggest wrestling company on the planet, and on this week's Raw, the former world champion seemingly returned the favor. On Raw, Punk did a little jog around the ring, which some saw as a victory lap aimed at the Young Bucks, so don't expect any holiday cards exchanged between these two sides this festive season. Now AEW has big plans for 2024, which will see the in-ring retirement of Sting, as well as the second ever All-In event inside Wembley Stadium in London. The first All-In was a massive show, featuring a stacked card inside the colossal venue, but AEW isn't going to be hosting any shows in London this year other than All-In. In an interview with the BBC, Tony Khan was asked about the possibility of a Dynamite or Collision being filmed in the UK, which would be another first, but Khan made it clear this won't happen. Instead, Wembley Stadium will be home to All In and All In Alone, and we'll have to see what matches get planned as we draw closer to the August 2024 event. One name who fans are expecting for All In 2024 is England's own Will Ospreay, who was officially made All Elite at Full Gear earlier this month. Tony Khan had been promising a huge signing in the days prior to Full Gear, and he delivered, and AEW won't be the only place fans can see the aerial assassin. In his interview with BBC West Midlands, Khan said that despite currently being under contract with AEW, Ospreay is able to go work with New Japan virtually anytime he wants to. It's quite the act of generosity from Khan, though it does mean that wrestling fans don't need to watch AEW to see one of AEW's contracted talents who has a massive following of fans. Khan also confirmed that Ospreay will be with AEW for All In on August 25th next year, but for the time being, expect to see plenty of the All Elite star in New Japan Pro Wrestling. It's been over a year since Karrion Kross and Scarlett were brought back to WWE, and despite high expectations at first for the former NXT champion, his return has fallen flat. No longer do fans talk about Kross as a potential opponent for Roman Reigns, and while it was back in October that reports of a push came out, that push never materialized on TV. Kross was also nixed from the October 28th SmackDown, as the promo segment he would have been part of reportedly made no sense, and he's now taken to Twitter with a cryptic message. Responding to a fan wanting to see him and Scarlett, Kross said, "We live, alive and well, ready, and very angry." And we can't help but wonder whether this was sharing some real-life frustrations. While Triple H's creative has done wonders for so many superstars, Kross has been the victim of stop-start pushes, feuds with Drew McIntyre and AJ Styles that did nothing, and a lengthy break from TV. Do you think Kross will ever get the big push many hope to see, or is he simply a victim of WWE having a massive roster and not enough TV time? Let us know your thoughts below. As previously reported, former TNA owner Dixie Carter was at this week's episode of Raw, given that the show was in her hometown of Nashville, Tennessee. Turns out that Dixie did more than just watch the show, as in photos shared online, Carter can be seen mingling at Raw and catching up with some old friends. TNA alum including Cody Rhodes, Nick Aldis, Chelsea Green, Drake Maverick, and Bruce Pritchard can be seen hanging out with Dixie, who clearly had a blast at this week's Raw. It turns out that Bruce Pritchard, a key figure in WWE, extended the invitation to Dixie, and she graciously accepted, and it'll be interesting to see if there's anything next for her and WWE. Was her time at Raw a friendly reunion, or could there have been plans for her? Only time will tell, and until then, Carter's presence at a WWE show has sparked a lot of conversation. What do you think of Carter's backstage appearance at WWE Monday Night Raw? Do you think it could lead to any potential collaborations? Leave us a comment below. Over to AEW Dynamite, as last week's Thanksgiving Eve episode had a slight overrun, which was reflected in the viewing figures for the broadcast. While the main show attracted around 845,000 viewers, the overrun segment managed to retain an audience of around 666,000, and we now know more about the relationship between Tony Khan and TBS. On Wrestling Observer Radio, it was explained that this later overrun was not planned, but because of the momentum of the show, TBS allowed the show to go long whilst it was on the air. The fact that Khan can have last-minute requests for extra time granted says a lot about AEW's relationship with TBS, and while some fans think AEW is dipped, those in TBS clearly like what they're seeing. We'll have to see what's next for AEW as they build towards their World's End pay-per-view, but it's clear that TBS thinks very highly of their wrestling show to grant them this extra time. In non-title action, NXT champion Ilja Dragunov picked up a win over Nathan Frazier, and Baron Corbin appeared on the Titantron to offer the Mad Dragon a special gift. Corbin said he'd give Dragunov a first-class ticket back to Germany so that he could be with his family, but made it clear that Dragunov wouldn't be taking the NXT championship with him. Corbin agreed to meet Dragunov face-to-face next week, and with Corbin's promos these past 2 weeks being solid, it's now up to both men to deliver in the ring at NXT Deadline next month. The Ariana Grace vs. Carmen Petrovic match saw plenty of distraction from Joe Gacy, who ran off with the ring bell early into the match. Gacy returned to ring the bell after Grace planted Petrovic with a forward fireman's carry for the win, and while this match was between two talented women, neither was the focus of this segment. During the Brooks Jensen vs. Lexis King match, Jensen had his opponent on the ropes before Carmelo Hayes arrived to get some revenge on King. Unfortunately, this distraction accidentally helped King hit the coronation for the win, and despite being the victor, this match was entirely about Jensen, with the heel sneaking the win. NXT has put so much into King from the start, with his feud with Carmelo Hayes and Trick Williams setting him up as a top heel of the Gold brand. Now though, he needs to back up the trust NXT has put in him by competing at a high level, and this NXT also saw a development in the mystery as to who attacked Trick. NXT Anonymous showed a video of King stalking Trick just before he got attacked, and after watching the footage, Melo and Trick talked about making King pay. While NXT continues to sell that King was the one who attacked Trick, it seems unlikely that'll be the final result, and Melo still looks to be the most likely culprit. Each Friday, Corey Graves and Kevin Patrick would host their weekly After the Bell podcast, but if you're an avid listener, you'll have noticed there hasn't been a new episode in some time. The most recent episode was on November 10th and saw Bobby Lashley as the show's guest, and we now know why there haven't been any new episodes. Sean Ross Sapp noted on Twitter that the show has wrapped for now, and there are currently no plans for new episodes to be released. It was also noted that we weren't told if this had long been the plan or was the result of personal changes as Corey Graves recently had a child. A lot has happened since the latest episode, and while fans would love to hear the After the Bell team talk about the likes of Randy Orton and CM Punk, that, unfortunately, won't be happening.